So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to use some of the Unreal Engine 5.4 animators and operator things in Unreal Engine 5.4 preview. So there might be some bugs. Let's get into it and figure some of that stuff out. Before we get started, I do want to do a quick shout out to Winbush. He just put out a video on the audio reactive capabilities of Unreal Engine 5.4, and I've been playing with this for a couple of days, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for VJ loops. So if you want the first primer, I do recommend checking out his video. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the basics, and I do want to touch on a couple quirks and bugs that might be worth addressing. So last quick thing, this is Future Jags, and I want to let you know that because this is the preview version, I'm getting some weird errors with rendering. I have not been able to render out the sound wave animator with the movie render queue that you will see right here, but a lot of the other properties like the time function and bounce still seem to be working. So because this is Unreal Engine 5.4 preview, it is worth acknowledging that some of the stuff might not be fully released just yet. All right, with all that said, let's go to the actual tutorial. So the first thing is we have this audio in my sequencer, and I am in the motion design mode. If you don't have the motion design mode enabled, you do have to go to your settings, plugins, and type in motion, and go ahead and enable motion design. So in the motion design mode, we have our sequencer down here, and I have this scene. Let's go ahead and leave my camera, and we have the Unreal logo, I have some gobo lights, and some dancing Unreal mannequins. So the first thing I want to show is creating some audio reaction, and I already have the logo already bouncing to the logo, or the logo of Unreal bouncing to the beat of the music. And to do that, what we have is something called operators and animators. If you don't have the operator mode, you can go up to window and operator stack. And then if we go ahead and look at this new window, we have our modifiers, which are more like 2D effects and some masking. We'll talk about that in another video, but we also have animators. And we have this tab here where we can add animators. We can add a bounce, an oscillate, time, wiggle, etc. Let's go ahead and delete the sound wave. We'll cover that first. So for the Unreal logo, you could access your animators in a couple of ways. First, you could do it through the operator stack window, or if I go to my outliner or my motion design outliner, and then I scroll up in the details panel, I can right click on almost any property. There are some caveats here, but let's just start with scale for now. We'll right click and we can see that we have our animator properties. We can edit animators here, and it's going to give you this window. I have not really figured out why it's useful, so I just use the operator stack window, but we could also add our animators. So let's go ahead and add a sound wave, and I want the scale. So we get this window to pop up, and it's asking us a couple of things. First off, we need some sound. The second is how big of a change on a global level are we doing? How frequently is it happening? And then all of the individual properties of this animator. So first off, we need to add some audio to our sequence. I have a .wav file in my project here, but you can import MP3s. I do recommend using WAV files though. According to the Unreal Engine 4 old documentation, it did recommend using WAV, so old habits die hard. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that sometimes with the sequencer, if you're trying to retime the music, what you'll get is a mismatch of music, and it'll always play at the beginning. To fix that, you want to set the mode from Binc Audio to PCM. This is theoretically more expensive or more memory usage, but it should fix any playback issues. So set it to PCM and then save it and then click OK. Next, we can go ahead and click on our audio, drag and hover over the sequencer, and then drag it into our scene. I already have it there, so I'm just going to hit escape on my keyboard. Now we have our music in our sequencer. Let's go ahead and sample that sound. So we'll type in the first words and just search it up in the search bar here, drop it in, and then we need to address the sequencer here. So if we set the time source name from world to sequence, it's now going to look for a sequencer that you have open, and we need to select the sequencer name. Now, for some reason, my label here, demo, is not showing up as here, so you just have to go through the visual hierarchy. So this is the 0 one. We're working in the top one currently. And now if we go ahead and leave our camera, we can go ahead and see that we have our logo. And if I play back, We're doing a little sound bounce to the music. Now, here's a couple things that are worth mentioning. The first is that if we looked at this linked properties option, we can see that what is it affecting? We have our min and max amplitude. How much of a scale is it going to create? So this is from 0 to 1, and then the mode, which is absolute, which means at frame 0 of this sound, the music is already playing, which means it is at 0.676 or 76% volume according to Unreal. But what if we want to make this logo bigger? If we try and increase our scale, it's not working. Well, if you go into your linked properties and set this from absolute to additive, it will take the existing scale and add whatever the volume percentage of the music it is. So let's go ahead and set the mode to additive across the board for all of the axes. And if you're doing this for rotation, you will have to do the same thing. Let's go ahead and look through our camera and play this back. Cool, but we realize we're at a wrong angle, so let's just go ahead and play it back over here. Cool. We have something that is close to what we had at the beginning of this video. So next, let's go ahead and talk about the time function. So I am going to scroll up into my motion design outliner over here, and I have my camera spinner. So I created a null actor and I put it at world center, and then I put the camera under it and I offset it by a certain value in X. If we go ahead and look through our camera, the X value is giving us our distance, or our back and forth for our little scene here. But I want to do a spin effect as if this camera is spinning around our scene. So to do that, what we need to do is let's go ahead and select our camera spinner, and we can go ahead and add an animator. And instead of the sound wave, we're going to use the time function, and we will use the rotation property. It's going to freak out on you. That's okay. Don't worry. What we're going to do is turn off these other properties. Now, because these animators are still in preview, there are some little quirks and bugs that we will have to acknowledge. First off, our camera is now tilted. We need to fix that. So we can go into our camera and make sure that the roll, the X value, everything is basically zeroed out. So once that's done, let's go back into our time function of our camera spinner, and let's look at the linked properties. I believe we want the Y value. Yes, but we're getting an issue. We're getting some weird popping. The reason why that's happening is if we go into the relative rotation Y, we can see that the max and min is set to 90. We don't want that. We're going to set the min to 0 and the max to 360. And if we see, we're now doing a full 360 spin, and if I recall correctly, the value of 1 is typically 1 second in Unreal, but we don't want that. So this frequency is going to be 1 second. Let's say we want to do a full revolution over a much longer time. We would set this frequency to 0.1, and now we're getting a much softer spin, which is exactly what we want, and we're getting a full rotation around our scene. So the time function is super valuable, and I'm super stoked about it. But the last function I'm really excited about that I've been asking for in Unreal Engine for a very long time is the wiggle function. So let's say hypothetically in this camera, I want to add a little bit of camera sway, and I didn't want to have to make a blueprint. So to do that, what we can do is go to Add Animator and Wiggle, and let's go ahead and add a wiggle on the Z and Y. Now, the reason why I'm doing Z and Y is I want to keep the same distance away from my object, and we know that was the X value. But now, if we go ahead and look at the camera, it's doing a wiggle. It's doing exactly what I want. We're getting a little bit of Z depth change, but I'm not too worried about that. For this tutorial, I could fuss with that if I really needed to. But let's say hypothetically we wanted this to be driven by, instead of the world, we wanted it to be the sequence. So we can go ahead and set the time source name from world to sequence, and now we will only do the spin or the wiggle whenever we are playing back, but we have to make sure we select our sequence. So cool, awesome. Now, how do we get this to affect some of our objects in our scene? let's say hypothetically I wanted to affect the little noise cloner here I have based on the sound as well. So what I can do is I can go ahead and find the cloner in my scene. I'm going to close all these dancers, find this cloner, which is going to be this guy right here, and I wanted to add some sound effect to the actual particles here. To do that, what we can do is we can, in the cloner, we can spawn a linked effector. And if you don't want to do it that way, you want to do it the manual way, you can go up to your motion design mode up here, go to actors and effectors and cloners. All that stuff is going to be in your motion design mode. So let's go ahead and just spawn a linked effector. This is effector 3, and we will call this sound react. Awesome. So then what we can do is we can look at the effector and we can see that it's not actually affecting our clones. If I go ahead and increase the scale of this effector, it should push them up on, push them upwards on the, I guess that's the y-axis. But what if I wanted to increase the scale instead? So what I'm going to do is I am going to set the first easing mode from linear to this S-curve right here. It just is going to look a little bit nicer. And then what I'm going to do is set the offset to 0. But I can go into the scale and set this to like 4, 4, and 4. So now these clones are much larger. If I scroll up over here and I adjust the magnitude, we can drive the size of our clones based on the effector here with the magnitude. So now if I go ahead and right click on this property and set this to sound wave and set the magnitude, very conveniently, we also are not limited to adding sound effectors or wiggle effectors to just position, scale, and rotation. So let's go ahead and select our sound wave again, type in jags. We will find our sequence like so. And now if we go ahead and play this back, we're getting a little bit of bounce with the camera, we're getting a little bit of scale with the particles, but there's just one problem. It's super intense. And the reason why that's happening is if we go into the magnitude here, we can see that it's additive, but the magnitude is clamped between 0 and 1. So if you're adding and the magnitude is already really high, it's gonna really just freak out. So you could either set this to absolute, so we can just go like so, and then now it's a much easier look. But if you want a little bit more fine-tuned control, you could also set it to additive and then change the magnitude so that it's not always going to get clamped at 1. So let's see how that comes back. And we'll actually rewind that and just go into the magnitude and set it to absolute instead. And yeah, that looks pretty good. And if you don't like the look of the scale animation, you could try setting it to a different easing curve, or you can increase the radius or the outer radius, etc. And you can even drive the inner radius with the sound wave as well. So all that is to say, some of the new Unreal Engine 5.4 animator tools are super cool, and I'm super stoked about them. Again, this is still preview, so there might be a couple quirks that are worth acknowledging, but hey, we now have some motion graphics tools that are going to make everyone's life very easy for VJ Loop kind of things. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, let me know in the comment section down below. If you have questions, comments, concerns, comment section is down there for that as well. And I will leave you with the final tip, and that is eat 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. You make some. Goodbye, my friends. Bye.